Hey everyone, this is Zan, and welcome to Dominion 6 at a Glance, featuring middle-aged Phlegra, the deformed giants. They are tyrannical giants, cursed and deformed for their hubris against the gods and their kingdoms of enslaved humans. Human taskmaster mages enforce and expand the national slavery, and as such, the nation focuses on masses of pitiable humans, magical slavery, and giants powerful enough to take on armies all by themselves. The Phlegra unit roster comes in three varieties. It has the pitiable enslaved humans with their cheap gold and recruitment point cost, but low morale and low upkeep. They tend to synergize very well with flaming arrows, and probably are good at dying. You have gold sinks in your Cyclops that are gold heavy, but otherwise extremely cheap and hit very hard, especially the Cyclops Hurler with this ranged boulder attack that is great at breaking forts with their high siege strength. And finally, the Higanti Warrior, which, when I first encountered this nation, people told me that these guys are awful. I totally disagree because they have gold parity with their hit points almost. They're pretty large. They have a repelling spear. They berserk. They have some resistances, high magic resistance, high mat move. The only issue is that they're going to be limited by your forts. But otherwise, these guys are fantastic, and you should be recruiting them throughout the entire game. The only thing to be mindful of is that they do cause unrest in the provinces that they're in, so you might need to have a fort that you focus all of your Gigantes to gather in, where you don't care if the unrest gets really, really high. Moving on to the Phlegran commanders, they don't actually have very good leadership, mostly in the Trophimos commander having the +1 and the Taskmaster combination, and the Cyclops chieftain, whose only saving grace is that he's size 6, which will be important because the Gigantes can only be led by a size 6. Onto the actual mages, they have a shackled mage, which is fairly flimsy but is an automatic communion slave, which is great. And you can probably get never enough of those. They're going to work hand in hand with your Trophimos Oppressor, which is an automatic communion master and an okay unit leader, but can't really do formations. Now, you also have these high health Cyclops Shepherd Shamans, which bring in some nature magic. They can also lead some Gigantes, although not great. And they can summon Undisciplined Mouflon, which will provide food to your armies, and that'll be important combination with whatever province you decide to fill up with your Gigantes. Now, your other mages are going to be your Trophimos Priests, which its only saving grace is that while being your only priest, it can also research, which is kind of cool. And your Trophimos Sage, which is honestly one of the better mages I would like to have on a nation because they are a linked random, meaning that they are going to be a fire 2, air 2, water 2, or earth 2 at all times, which means that every single one of them will be good, even if it may not be the path that you want it to be. Now, finally, you have your Phlegran Tyrant. Now, I can do an entire video on this guy, but I will not, and I will just say that it is a powerful super combatant. It is a powerful super caster if you don't want to necessarily melee with it, although they do have berserk, so they might end up meleeing anyways. It can capture slaves, which will be these axe helots, which is probably the one you want anyways. And generally, there's a lot you can do with these guys. Just keep in mind, again, that they do cause unrest, and you might want to have a fort to gather all your Gigantes in. And be mindful of, gluttony, eating up all the supplies. And finally, we have the Elder Cyclops. This is the same one from Early Age Macone. And you don't want too many of these. You want a few of them just to forge. Particularly, you want to try to get an Air 2 random, a Fire 3 random, and a Water 1 random. And so the reason we want these specific Cyclops is so that once we hit Construction 7, we can leverage their Master Smith ability to go all the way to crafting a Staff of Elemental Mastery and craft 3 different air boosters. So traditionally, it starts with a Fire 3 Cyclops. In the case of Middle-Aged Phlegra, you can also use a Tyrant, and either will craft a Flame Helmet or a Skull of Fire. Now, the Water 1 Cyclops will craft a Water Bracelet, equip it, and then craft a Robe of the Sea, and equip that as well. Finally, using the Fire Booster, making it a Fire 3, Water 3 with Master Smith, it can craft a Staff of Elemental Mastery. Now, you put this staff on the Air 2 random Cyclops, and it can craft a Air Helmet. And with that Air Helmet equipped, it can now craft the Horn of Storms. And that is the Elder Cyclops Staff of Elemental Mastery Air Magic minigame. Middle-Aged Phlegra can do this, and Macone can do this as well. We're going to go straight into the non-national summons. The Draconians themselves are just happen to be good because they have fairly decent stats. You get a lot of them. Once you cast the spell, you can get 1 Draconian per turn forever, and they have high mat move. Alternatively, one summon I really like for this nation I feel is underused is going to be the Fire Drake. You don't want to combine it with your humans, but if you have a front line of Gigantes, they can't go through them, so they're stuck behind, and they're going to be casting this Drake Fire attack, which your Gigantes, for the most part, can ignore due to their high armor, their Berserk, and their fire resistance. So a line of Gigantes with Fire Drakes behind them is super deadly, and it's honestly really easy for this nation to do. Scorpion Beasts are also good if you need some armor piercing and death poison attacks. And Green Lions are always fantastic summons if you don't know what to do with your water gems later on. Moving towards your national summons, your Earth Gems are going to compete between the in-combat only Sparte, which a lot of your mages can do, and the Hound of Twilight, which is really good, but only your Tyrants can summon. Now, your Death Gems, you have the choice of an Invisible Ethereal Cur, which is fantastic, and if you gift reason them, can actually have some blood magic paths, which can be useful. And the Lampad, which, if you gift reason them, can have astral paths. And before we move on to the spell recommendations, I do want to highlight the national item, the Oppressor's Headband, that this nation can make, and essentially it's just an auto-communion item, but you might want to put it on your Tyrants and combine them with your Shackled Mages to do some nifty things. Now, finally, moving to the spell recommendations. One of the first spells you're probably going to be casting on this nation is going to be Ignite Arrows and so on, because you have a lot of very cheap, massable human ranged units. Strength Giants for the same reason, it's going to give them a lot of strength. Your Gigantes don't really care for either of these, but early on you'll have humans too. Fireball is a nice early research that's going to give your Tyrants something to do in combat that's going to be super effective. Magma Eruption is kind of the continuation of this. It's hard to resist it because it just does a lot of physical damage and then applies a Heat Fatigue aura, which your Gigantes ignore. Invulnerability, Soul Vortex, and Phoenix Pyre is baby's first super combatant Tyrant, so that's a very important combination to just keep in mind, especially if you have Communion Slaves getting these buffs. And then finally, some of the tricks that make auto-communions strong are going to be the battlefield-wide spells you can cast on turn 1, and some examples of these are going to be Rain of Stones, Acid Storm, and Firestorm. These are all in Evocation 7. Moving on to the Pretender design of the nation, I think that it mostly needs gold, gems, and research, and therefore I like prioritizing growth, luck, and magic on this nation. They don't really need recruitment points or resources, and they don't need a real bless, so you can be as creative with it as you want. So my first recommendation is going to be the Telkine, because it gives us a very high air magic path, or earth or water. It's honestly really customizable. But the main reason we're going to take it is because it's going to cast Foul Vapors in every fight that it's in, which is something that you can't really do on this nation. You don't have any mages that can do it easily. And your Gigantes do have that 5 poison resistance and a lot of hit points that they can kind of ignore it. Whereas a lot of opponents, by the time this Dormant Titan wakes up, really don't have an answer for Foul Vapors. Another alternative to the Telkine is going to be the Mother of Monsters. I took this one in a Dominions 5 game with a similar bless here. And this is mostly a recuperation bless for the late game, not only to rehabilitate injured Tyrants that maybe got feeble-minded or crippled or something, but also give me the option for Tartarians later in the game. Notice that she has really high sorcery paths that let me do some shenanigans later. So this is definitely the late game option, and I think personally it worked out. I had a bunch of vampires flying around. It was pretty cool. And then finally, another option that I've considered taking but really haven't is going to be the Great Archon. So this nation thrives on having a lot of forts for a lot of commander points, and the Great Archon gives a good research bonus, +2 to everyone in the province. Also, as I mentioned, the nation needs a lot of gold. Well, the Great Archon can turn 10 fire gems into 700 gold instead of 350 because it's a good alchemist. So overall, it's kind of a pretender that you get and you kind of keep it in your capital. And it's going to help you research. It's going to give you a lot of gold. And also kind of important, it has the Earth Astral Crosspath, so it's going to make getting golems in the late game or even high astral magic into your communion super easy because he's a high astral mage. It's not just going to get magic duel. And finally, for the gameplay of the nation, how are you going to play this? Well, early game, I highly recommend you expand with your Gigante warriors and your archers. The warriors don't really care about the friendly fire for the archers. Don't forget that they giants need to be led by Cyclops. They refuse to be led by anything less than a size 6. A second or third fort will be necessary in a province near the capital, because remember that you're going to be sheltering all of your unrest-causing tyrants and gigantes there, so that they don't cause unrest in your capital or your other money-making provinces. Keep in mind that if gluttony or supplies are an issue, you can put a lot of Cyclops to summon Mouflon there and kind of feed them with it. It's kind of cool and thematic, right? And so your early game army is going to kind of look like a line of your Gigantes trying to rush to the enemy backline, which might be squishy mages. And behind them are going to be a bunch of fire arrow archers, because you cast ignite arrows on them. Tyrants casting some crazy evocations like Banefire, Fireball, Magma Eruption. Potentially some Drakes in front of the archers, but behind the Gigantes that are going to do Fire Breath. And that generally is going to be good. Now, if you don't want to use the giants, you can enslave a lot of axe warriors instead of recruiting the archers. Just keep in mind the opportunity cost of having your tyrants enslave troops in a province versus either researching, which is kind of hard early, crafting, or fighting. As you move into the mid game, again, the nation is really restricted on their commander points because you need a lot of oppressor archons, you need the slaves, you need tyrants. It's kind of crazy how much mage recruitment you need. So each fort you have should also be recruiting 2 Gigantes a turn, which is why, again, you want a lot of forts because you're limited to how many giants you can get every turn. Set up a logistics chain of your Cyclops commanders, kind of centralizing all of your giants where they need to be. Most of your gems should go to items for your tyrants and for your mages rather than summons. But if you need, I already listed kind of the decent summons there. If you find Astral and Nature, like Lizard Shamans, you really, really need this going into the late game because Nature Magic synergizes very well with Giants, and Astral Magic is just a basic necessity of the late game because of the magic resistance it provides. Decide early on, too, if you want to try to pursue Blood with the Curs, or if you need to just do Astral with Lampads. You have no choice. And finally, into the late game, become more careful with sending out lone supercombatants. They can start getting overwhelmed as players get some good research on. So start using them in groups, or maybe have an army assisting them. Just be careful because now these are kind of really heavy investments that can be easily countered. You want to prepare your armies to have very powerful turn 1 spells that tend to be battlefield wide, and what this does is it's going to interrupt whatever the other communion or the other side of the field is casting. So while they're casting Communion Master and Earth Power, you are doing Earthquake and Firestorm and other crazy spells. That's kind of the thing of this nation, right? Overall, I find that the armies of this nation tend to be a really heavy investment, so be mindful of remote attacks and gem baits affecting you. And with that, we will end our Middle Age Phlegra at a glance. Thank you all for watching, and remember to like and subscribe. See you next time.